he wrote a whole lot that was just repetitious after repetitious after repetitious. It seemed like he could have just said it pretty succinctly, but he kept repeating himself on certain things.
But even some of the prophets of Jesus do that in the Bible.
Yeah, and I think, it does tell you things that are important. One of the things I do like, I still like the quotes he always puts at the beginning of his chapters. I think those are very good, and I like this one, and especially whenever you see who it was written by. But it says, "The work has been chiefly amongst the young, and comparatively, but few others have been made partakers of it. Indeed, it has commonly been so when God has begun any great work for the revival of his church, he has taken the young people and cast off the old and stiff-necked generation." That was Jonathan Edwards commenting on the First Great Awakening. I just find that interesting, that even back then there was a view, a thought that for really God's movement sometimes does require a change, a newness, a different view on things. And the author does say we don't hear much in our church today about church leaders wanting to talk about or think about the influence of young people spiritually. And I think that's sad in many ways. I think that we do tend to, and he comes down to this thought, he comes down to the thought that what we've done in America today is, instead of it being, well, what we've done is we've taken, you have children, you have ending being children, and then you have adults, versus children starting to be adults and adults. We have lumped our youth in there still with children, instead of expecting them to begin learning to be adults. It's interesting that whenever I thought about it, because I had never really thought about that till I read this chapter, that we don't expect much out of our youth other than for them to be children. When in reality, when you look in the Old Testament and even the New Testament, you look at David, he was but a youth when he killed Goliath. You look at, I've been reading through the Kings, the Kings 1 and 2, and you look at that, and Joash, I think it was Joash, became king at age 7. Now that was an oddity. That was not, the general rule. But still, most of the ones who became kings, it was when they were 20 or in that age range. It was when they were still, would have been considered but a young person. And we have made youth just an extended childhood, instead of teaching them how to be adults. And I think that's why so often we see the pattern, and I have read this before, probably even mentioned it before, but the pattern being, children will come to church, or they'll be brought to church a lot of times. They'll get into a youth program. They will stay through that youth program, and then when they go off to college, they kind of leave church. Because they've been taught or have been led to believe the conclusion that's drawn is church is for kids. You hardly ever see them come back into the church until they have children themselves. And then they want to raise their kids in church. And then they begin to see the need for church. And then once you do capture them back, but they've wasted 10, 15 years of their life thinking that church is just for kids. When in reality, what our youth, what our young adults really want is someone to help them know how to grow up. If we want evangelistic church, we also need evangelistic young adults. We need young adults who think that church is more than just coming and spending a few minutes studying and the rest of it playing games, having fun, doing social activities, we need to begin teaching our young people that the seriousness of faith, the seriousness of what we believe. And you know, I've been around, you know, youth groups. I've been around, you know, I grew up in a youth group. I enjoyed going to youth group, but I do remember, I mean, I look back. Now, granted, we would take a trip once a year to Ridgecrest usually. And then when we went out to another church, we went to a different place, but it was still a retreat center. But even then, I remember, and goodness, I don't want to put myself in a bad light here, but you know, the first couple of times I went to Ridgecrest, it was really to see if I could find a girlfriend. Yeah, that's what 13, 14-year-old boys think about. But we were required to be in church. We had church service in the morning, church service at night, and then we had programs we had to attend during the day. I mean, I do think that was good. I look at what happened the last decade or so, and I see more youth going to the beach to have fun for their camp time. Now, they might do a nighttime Bible study. They might actually go out and share tracts 1 or 2 days while they're there. But most of the time that I've seen churches take youth out on trips like that, most of it is for fun and less of it is for actual learning and growing and knowing what it means to be a Christian. And I'm not saying that, you know, being a Christian means we need to be, you know, so focused and so hard-nosed that we have no fun. I think that being a Christian ought to be fun. There's a lot of fun things in being a Christian. I love fellowship. I love enjoying getting together with others and with friends and Christian family. But at the same time, I know that there's a seriousness about the gospel. And I think all too often why especially kids who go off to college and find it hard to retain their Christianity because now they're away, they don't realize the importance of Christianity. They think, well, it's just Sunday morning and maybe Wednesday night if you have some program for them, versus Christianity being about your life. And evangelism being about what we do as Christians. But I do know, as the guy says here, some of the most optimistic people in this world are youth. We could learn from that. We could use that. We could take that optimism and put that to work for us. You know, I think that is the important piece of youth, is that they do have an optimism. Because they can get up and they don't creak and have to take 10 minutes to fall out of bed, unless it's because they're really sleeping instead of falling out of bed. You know, I take 10 minutes to get out of bed, not because I'm not awake, but just because it takes that long to get my feet moving. You know, when I was younger, it wasn't that way. So I do understand, you know, that the next generation, the young generation, is really, you know, the group that we are depending on to carry the church forward. We need to begin thinking in terms of how do we do that? How do we train our young people to be evangelistic in their lifestyle? How do we begin training young people to be adults versus training them how to finish out being children? I will be honest, this has convicted me in terms of how I'm raising my daughter. Because I do need to raise her to become an adult, not to be another, you know, child for another 7, 8 years. I need for her, whenever she leaves high school, to know how to live for Christ, how to live right, how to live with faith. I like this question he asked here. What might happen if the church began to see the potential of youth as a missionary force? Now, I'll be honest, I'm not going to say that I was forward thinking because I wasn't thinking this way. I was thinking more because they were the ones who had, the ability to walk and do things. But I do know when I was at Dixiana, I always got the youth to go do this canvassing of the neighborhoods. We spent a lot of time training them how to go door to door and getting them to go and canvass and find out, well, who is looking for a church home. Our problem here is we don't have a whole lot of young people. I do feel like we need to begin praying for that. I have ideas, but we do need to pray. I like what he says here, and I wish, I don't know that we live close enough. But he says, what if college students became a priority of ministry rather than just some sidebar of a church? We do live fairly close to Midlands Tech, but Midlands Tech doesn't have campus that people live on. So it's a little bit harder, than going to a campus that has dorms and stuff. USC is a bit far. People that live downtown are probably not going to come out here. I mean, they don't come out here to do shopping. They don't come out here to do the things they do. It would be hard for me to picture us going into USC and asking them to come to where they don't even come to go to Walmart. So I have difficulty seeing how to reach USC. I do think there are ways to reach Midlands Tech, but I haven't figured it out yet. I'm open to ideas. If someone has some ideas, I'm open to some ideas of how to get in there and let people know that go there, because I'm sure there are some kids that are at Midlands Tech, or young adults, I shouldn't say kids, I should say young adults at Midlands Tech that are living in this area that probably need some grannies and grandmas and mamas and daddies to come alongside of them and help them know how to become an adult, help them know how to budget their monies on occasion. See, I think our evangelism is more than just preaching the gospel. I think that's a big part. That is the biggest part. But it also involves us learning what people's needs are. And I look at the younger generation today, and most of them don't know how to keep a pocketbook. They don't know how to keep a checkbook. And I think that's why so many of them go and let the bank companies talk them into getting into so much debt, they don't know how to get out of it. And I think we as churches, if we can help them become adults, responsible adults, it might open the doors for us also to help them become evangelistic adults. And I do think we need to begin thinking about that, thinking about it not being a program as much as it being taking the next generation where it needs to be. You see, I like what he says here. This next generation, even though they are the most unchurched in history, they're not going to be reached by hosting a youth rally or offering a paintball tournament. They're going to be reached by people helping them become adults. Because that is what they want to be. They do need to be adults. I did grow up in a church that I was blessed. And I will honestly say I was just blessed. I was. When we went out to the church out there and I just love Pine View Baptist Church. Their youth minister took an interest in me. Me along with 5 or 6 others went through. I remember the summer well. We went to his house and went through a Bible study once a week. We met at his house to go over Bible study that summer. It made a difference in my life. I will be honest, I don't remember much of the Bible study. I know it was about 1 John. I don't remember any of the direct lessons we had as far as being able to tell you word for word what was said. I remember the book. It was a big blue notebook we had that he took us through. But I remember there being that interest in us as growing up. I'm not sure that I see that in churches today. I see youth ministers being more interested in, well, what's the next program I need to have? What's the next outing I need to plan for? How much money can I get out of the church to let me do this thing or that thing, versus how do I reach the life of that young person who's becoming an adult? Because that is the most important part of evangelism there is. It's getting that next generation to think evangelistically, to think about the Great Commission, to be desirous of doing the Great Commission. I think we do have a lot to pray for. We have a lot to be praying about. Now, that being said, like I said, I know that we don't have a whole lot of youth in our church. Olivia, upcoming youth, Lily. We need to begin praying for the youth of the other churches. We need to begin praying for our church. We need to begin praying that we would begin training Randall and Ashley how to be parents that bring other parents that bring youth into the church. We need to begin praying for that, because I do think there's a lot of power in that prayer. A lot of power to help us change as a church in praying in that fashion. Like I say, he goes through an awful lot of pages talking about, these different things, the same thing over and over again. The different historical examples, the revivals that have occurred in the past, those. Almost every one of the Great Awakenings, there was some notion, something made known about the fact that there was colleges and young adults involved. In England, he says, the Evangelical Awakening, which was the Wesley brothers and George Whitefield, you've heard me mention their names before, they actually grew out of a foundation built in college through something called the Holy Club. Whitefield was only 26 when he witnessed revival in the American colonies. They took their youthfulness and let God use it. The Second Great Awakening featured movements on college campuses. Many of those, that Second Great Awakening here in America, it happened in the colleges first, and then rolled over into the churches. We don't realize, I don't think, how much we need to be in prayer for our colleges. Dwight Moody, many of us have heard his name over and over again throughout our years. He was 20 years old whenever he became the itinerant pastor that he was. There's just so many of these that we have to realize that the people that were leading them were young people. We need to be much in prayer for our young people. That God would use them, we would be able to train them, that we'd be able to get some impact on their life. He goes through some ways to retool youth ministry. I'm not going to go into that because I don't think we're there yet. I don't think that we are at a point of retooling ministry because we don't have one. But I do think whenever it gets to that point, we do need to begin thinking the way this book talks about. He mentioned something here, and Yeah, it almost scares me whenever I think of this new phrase, and I'd never even heard this before, the acrostic SOAP. I don't know if y'all remember reading that. Significant other adult person. There are so many kids who are raising themselves that it's not their parent that they consider their significant other adult person. It's a school teacher, a counselor, a gang member, someone else that they look up to that's important in their lives because their parents aren't there. That's a sad thought. It scares me too because I understand what he's saying here. It says he's met men in their 30s who act like they're in their terrible 3s. We have a lost generation because we've told them that church is not for adults. Church is for having fun as a youth versus it's about becoming an adult. And I think we need to begin thinking differently as to how we do youth work. Now, he mentioned stuff in here that, I'm going to be honest, is no longer relevant. I have found out. He talks about, we need to get into what is, popular, successful in order to reach youth, like Facebook. Youth don't do Facebook anymore. They do Snapchat or something of that nature. They don't do Facebook. Facebook's for old people now. Did you realize that? It's for us old people. They don't get on there because their parents are on there. But, we do need to be involved in the area, in the arenas that our kids, our young adults, our adult-to-be's are involved in so that we can influence them in the right direction. I think all too often in America today, we've let young people raise themselves instead of us raising them. And they're not doing the good job that they need to do because they don't know. And we do know. And I think that's what he's trying to get across. Is our job going forward is to help raise children into young adults, not raise them as finishing their childhood. And that's about where I'm going to stop for tonight. I do think, there is one more chapter, chapter 26, about reaching the inner city. I hope next week we will finish up the book and we'll get started on some new things. I hope this has been interesting for everyone. I hope that it's been something that you would say has been enjoyable. But I do look forward to something new too.